Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Peter Bone.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, Rushden Lakes is a major retail leisure park which will create 2,000 new jobs. Yes to Rushden Lakes. Local Conservative councils, the Northamptonshire Telegraph, Councillor Tom Pursclove's listening campaign and my listening campaign have all supported this proposal. In 9 years in Parliament, I've never known of a development that has so much public support. Could the Prime Minister use his best efforts to ensure that the outcome of the public inquiry is announced as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
I know my honourable friend campaigns vigorously for his constituents and for local businesses and for job-creating developments like this one. As I'm sure he is aware, I'm not able to get involved in specific planning decisions, but I understand that a decision on this application will be made as soon as possible, and of course that would involve the Secretary of State taking into account all the representations, including from the honourable gentleman, that he receives.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House and the whole country has been watching events in Ukraine with great concern. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Russia's actions in surrounding Ukrainian military sites, violating Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, are completely without any justification? And does he further agree that these actions deserve to be condemned unreservedly across the international community?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I agree with the right honourable gentleman that what Russia has done is completely unacceptable. We should be clear about our national interest and our aim in all of this. Our national interest is that we have a strong interest in a world where the rule of law is upheld, where territorial integrity is respected. Stability is a vital part of our long-term economic plan, and we should be clear that our aim is to deter further Russian military action and to de-escalate this situation. And he's completely right to say that the action by the Russian government should be condemned by the whole world.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we agree there needs to be continuing pressure on the Russian government, and I will come to that issue. But all members will welcome the talks that are going on as we speak between US Secretary of State John Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov. Given the fragility of the situation on the ground, does the Prime Minister believe that one important outcome from these talks would be if they led to direct high-level talks between Russia and Ukraine?
In order to de-escalate this situation, the most important thing that should be arranged is a forum for discussions in which the Russians and the Ukrainians can speak to each other. There have been some contacts between Russian ministers and Ukrainian ministers. This morning there are meetings taking place in Paris covering other issues as well, but there has been some progress in putting together a contact group, an idea that I proposed to the Polish Prime Minister back in January, to start having a group of countries around Russia and Ukraine to encourage such dialogue to take place. That's the single most important thing that could help to de-escalate the situation.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, clearly we all hope for a good outcome from those talks, but the EU also has a crucial role to play. And does he agree that the EU at the Leaders' Summit tomorrow must show it is up to the task of dealing with the biggest security crisis on its continent since Kosovo? Given the issues raised about the UK's position from the leaked Downing Street document, can you tell us specifically what the UK will be tabling at the summit tomorrow, including keeping open the prospect of trade sanctions?
Well, first of all, it is important that the European Union shows a unity of purpose and a clear voice tomorrow at the leaders' meeting. What I think we need to do is, first of all, be absolutely clear that the status quo we're faced with today, where Russian troops are outside their bases in the Crimea, is unacceptable. And as I've said, costs and consequences need to follow from that. That is why, for instance, we've suspended preparations for the G8 meeting. Indeed, it is hard to see, in these current circumstances, how a G8 meeting can properly go ahead. We've withdrawn royal visits and ministerial visits to the Sochi Paralympic Games. There are further steps that we should consider even as we look at the current status quo, but we also need to consider what extra steps, what extra, as I put it, political, economic and diplomatic steps can be taken to discourage Russia from taking further steps in terms of dismembering and disrespecting the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
I completely share his view about the G8 and the other matters that he mentioned. Let me raise one other specific issue with him. When he was leader of the opposition in 2008, at the time of the invasion of Georgia, he said this: Russia's elite values their ties to Europe, their shopping and their luxury weekends. Russian armies can't march into other countries while Russian shoppers carry on marching into Selfridges. Does he agree with me that if we do not see the required action from Russia, we should look at asset freezes and travel restrictions on designated individuals so that Russia is clear about the consequences of its actions?
As I have put it, when we look at the diplomatic, economic and political steps we could take, nothing should be off the table. We've already taken some important steps in terms of the Ukrainian corrupt oligarchs and making sure that their assets are properly dealt with, including here in the UK, if that's the case. So we shouldn't rule out other things for the future, but as I've tried to explain today, I think there are those steps we need to take in respect of the current unacceptable situation, and then agree with our European partners and our American partners, and I'll be speaking to President Obama this afternoon and meeting with Angela Merkel and President Hollande before the European Council tomorrow, agree with them what further steps should be taken as well.
I'm sure he will push for as broad an agreement as possible at the EU Council, and we welcome that. Let me ask him about the Ukrainian government and support for them. Does he agree that part of the way forward is providing them with that support, while making clear to them that the government needs to be inclusive and protect the rights of the Russian-speaking population within the Ukraine? And does he further agree that there is no reason for Russia to believe that strengthening ties between Ukraine and the EU needs to be at the expense of Russia?
I think it is important, as the right honourable gentleman says, that this should not be seen as a tug of war between the European Union and Russia. But we should be in favour of the Ukrainian people being able to choose their own future. In my view, this has been as much about the Ukrainian people wanting to lean towards a better relationship with the European Union, as much about that as wanting to get rid of the appalling levels of corruption that they've had to put up with in their government. I think that is the key thing. I think it's absolutely welcome that the Foreign Secretary, and right that he was the first international leader to go to Kiev and to meet with the Ukrainian leaders. He made two important points to them. One is that they must make sure they have an inclusive set of institutions and rules and laws in the Ukraine, and they do not discriminate against minorities or Russian speakers, but also that we stand ready as members of the European Union, as leading players in the International Monetary Fund, to help the Ukraine in its hour of need. There are all sorts of steps the new Ukrainian government will have to make in order to make that possible, but if they can do that, then we should stand by them in their hour of need.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome that and providing all necessary support for the Ukrainian government. Let me say this finally. All of us recognise that this is a delicate and dangerous moment for international security, and it is the combination of diplomacy, resolve in the international community, and support for the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian self-determination that is the best hope for securing an end to this crisis. In the pursuit of that goal, I can assure the Prime Minister the government will have our full support.
I'm very grateful for what the right honourable gentleman has said this morning. I think just as we need to see tomorrow a voice of unity and clarity from the countries of the European Union, not always easy to get when there are 28 different nations around the table, but it's also very welcome that there's such a clear and unified voice going out from this House to say to the Russian government, what you have done is wrong, what you've done should not be allowed to stand, and there'll be costs and consequences not only for what has been done already, but further costs and consequences if you were to take this further.
Caroline Dinage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, a judge sentenced a Gosport man to 9 years in prison for causing the death by dangerous driving of 2 teenage girls. Given that that amounts to effectively 4 years per life, does the Prime Minister agree that it's high time we looked again at the maximum sentence for causing death by dangerous driving?
Minister.
Can I first of all congratulate my honourable friend on her happy news at the weekend, and I'm sure members across the House will want to join in on that. The point she raises about death from dangerous driving is indeed an issue that was raised at Prime Minister's questions last week, and as I said then, I think it's important that the Lord Chancellor and his department look carefully about what more we can do to make sure we send the clearest possible message about the unacceptability of this crime.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last July, the Prime Minister rightly promised legislation banning internet rape porn. So can he explain to parents why Clause 16 of his Criminal Justice and Courts Bill doesn't ban simulated child abuse or staged rape online?
Well, the Honourable Lady has a long track record of arguing about these issues, and I think it was very welcome that we made the announcement to ban rape porn, and that is being carried through. I'll look very carefully at the measures that she's raising and the issues she's raising now. I think we do have a good record about putting in place stronger internet filters, about working with the industry to make sure that searches for unacceptable terms can't be made, and for separate legislative steps like banning rape porn. But I'll look very carefully at the specific proposals that she makes.
Stephen Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2009, there were 610 18 to 24-year-olds in Chester who were out of work and claiming job seekers allowance. Last month, that number almost halved to 330. This week is National Apprenticeship Week, so would the Prime Minister congratulate employers who are creating apprenticeships, creating jobs and creating opportunities for young people, so we never again see the massive waste of young talent that occurred.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise National Apprenticeship Week, which is a really important moment to advertise to businesses large and small the advantages of taking on apprentices. What we're going to see during this Parliament is 2 million apprenticeship starts. That is what we are aiming for. 1.6 million have already taken place. As he says, unemployment in his own constituency has fallen, as has the claimant count, but we want to see many more apprentices, and we also want to see smaller firms coming forward and taking on their first apprentice.
Mary Cray.
In 2006, 7-year-old Christy Shepherd and her little brother Bobby died of carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a faulty boiler at their hotel in Greece. Their father Neil and his partner Ruth narrowly escaped with their lives. And after 7 agonising years, the inquest into their deaths is about to begin. But the Legal Aid Agency has refused the family funding to be legally represented at the inquest, and on Friday Thomas Cook tried to prevent the inquest even from taking place. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and the parents to hear why it is imperative that the parents are legally representative at this inquest, so the full facts are learned surrounding their children's deaths, so that no other British family suffers a similar tragedy when they take their children on holiday?
I do remember this absolutely tragic case, and it's appalling that it's taken so long for the inquest to take place. When you've lost a child, you want to know the answers of why it happened and whether it could have been prevented, and that lessons will be learnt for the future. So I'm very content to arrange the sorts of meetings that she talks about to help in this case, and to make sure that the Foreign Office, who do, I think, an excellent job at helping people when they're dealing with issues overseas, is doing all they can to help her constituents.
Mr. Brooks Newmark.
Thank you. In Braintree, unemployment has dropped from 3.4% to 2.3%. And equally importantly, youth unemployment has dropped 6.3% to 4.4% since 2010. Would the Prime Minister agree with me the Chancellor's long-term economic plan is working? And following the recent success of the Braintree Youth Jobs Fair, would he join me in thanking Braintree District Council, Job Centre Plus and Ignite for all the hard work they are doing in encouraging local businesses to hire young people?
I think my honourable friend has a very strong track record of campaigning and fighting for these issues. He co-founded the Million Jobs campaign, and let's recognise the fact we have created 1 million new jobs, more than 1 million new jobs under this government. One of the things my honourable friend was pushing for was that under-21s should not have to pay national insurance contributions when they are employed, and that's something brought in the autumn statement, which I think is going to make a huge difference. The Braintree Youth Jobs Fair has also made a big difference locally. I know that the party opposite seem to groan as soon as unemployment falling is mentioned, but the fact is it is falling across the country, and that's a very welcome sign that our long-term economic plan is working.
Mr. Jack Straw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister share my astonishment at a decision announced yesterday that Transpennine Express, which covers train services across the whole of the north of England, is to lose 1 in 8 of its trains, which are to be transferred to Chiltern Rail for the greater comfort and convenience of commuters in the south of England?
Sure.
And
isn't that your constituents?
is he aware that services, the Transpennine services, are already amongst the most overcrowded in the country? And would he...
Order. There's quite a simple issue of courtesy. The Right Honourable Gentleman will be heard however long it takes. So the quicker people remember their manners, the better. The Right Honourable Gentleman.
I just say to members opposite, Mr. Speaker, this may be a laughing matter to them. It is certainly not a laughing matter to people in the north of England. Could he bear in mind that this decision has been made without the agreement of the train operating company, but by Porterbrook and the leasing company?
The Prime Minister. The Prime Minister. The Prime Minister. Order. 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 I was fair to the Right Honourable Gentleman, but the question was frankly too long. The Prime Minister.
Well, I will look very carefully at the point the Right Honourable Gentleman raises. What I would say, of course, we have announced plans to electrify the Transpennine railway line, which I think will make a big difference. And also, we are going ahead with the Northern Hub that will also make a difference. And so these are big steps forward. I hope he won't find it too cheeky if I point out that the line that both he and I use, of course, the Cotswold line and Charlbury railway station, has also received a lot of extra investment under this government, and he now enjoys a double-track line when he makes his journey from my constituency into London.
Speaker, thank you, sir. Not me.
No, not you. No. Another time if the Honourable Gentleman's lucky. Mr. Menzies.
Can I put on record my thanks to the Prime Minister for all the efforts that he personally puts in to securing typhoon export orders? But can I ask the Prime Minister's assurance that his government will leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of typhoon exports to support apprenticeships and highly skilled jobs in Water, my constituency, as part of this government's long-term economic plan?
No, well, it was a huge pleasure with the Honourable Gentleman to visit Wharton and see the quality of the apprenticeships that BAE Systems are offering in building the Typhoon aircraft, an absolutely superb aircraft. I can give him my assurance that I will go on banging the drum for British exports, including defence exports. We had a very good progress with the order from Oman, which will secure and safeguard jobs in his constituency. And frankly, I was criticised by the party opposite for taking defence contractors on trade missions overseas. They don't think it's appropriate. I think it is appropriate. I think we should be standing up for our defence industry and defence jobs.
Chris Williamson.
Will the Prime Minister end the speculation over the future of the Hunting Act by confirming that he doesn't intend to use a statutory instrument to repeal or amend the Act by removing the limit on the number of dogs that can be used to flush an animal to guns?
Well, this will quite properly be a matter for the House of Commons. As he will know, what has happened is a group of Welsh and other members of Parliament have looked at a particular problem of pest control in upland areas of Wales and other parts of the country. They are making a proposal. That proposal will be properly examined by the department, and in the end the House of Commons will be able to decide.
Mr. Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to my honourable friend's question, and during National Apprenticeships Week, we should celebrate the fact that in the last year, 500,000 people began an apprenticeship, nearly double. Mr. Speaker, nearly double the number who started in 2009-10. But we shouldn't rest there, and does the Prime Minister agree with me? We need to do more to incentivise schools to promote apprenticeships, and we need to do more still to get employers to come forward with apprenticeships, particularly for young people.
Well, my honourable friend speaks about this with great commitment because of his chairmanship of the Education Select Committee. And the point that he and I have discussed, which I think is very important, is we need to make sure we're giving the clearest possible information to our young people in schools about the choices they can make. I think the academic path of A-levels and UCAS and universities has been well set out and well understood, including all by Britain's teachers. We need it as well understood what the opportunities are for vocational education and apprenticeships, not least because you don't have to choose long-term between the two. You can carry out an apprenticeship and carry out a degree, earning and learning at the same time.
Kerry McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, this year is the EU year of tackling food waste. Given the absolute scandal of up to 40% of our food being wasted in this country and the huge numbers of people that we know are having to go to food banks because they can't afford to feed themselves and their family, will the Prime Minister throw his weight behind this initiative and support efforts to reduce food waste in this country?
I think it's important to tackle the issue of food waste, and a number of important debates have been held in this House and in Westminster Hall about this issue. I think the most important thing, though, in terms of helping people with weekly budgets is to make sure we keep growing the economy, we keep getting people back to work, we keep creating jobs, and also we keep people's taxes down so they have more of their own money to spend as they choose.
David Heath. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last few months in Somerset, we've had a deluge of press, media and film cameras, which has now ebbed and receded and is barely a trickle, but the floods are still with us. Yeah. And this week we will have produced the local strategy. That shows that long-term local management of the rivers cannot be met within the constraints of local government finance. Will he commit to me that whatever needs to be changed will be changed in order to give us a sustainable management for the future?
Well, I would commend all of the Somerset MPs for working together extremely well, bringing together the local agencies, including the EA, local councils, farmers and others, to try and come up with the right long-term solution for the people of Somerset. I agree with him that the cameras and the press have now departed, and it's very important we don't take our eye off the important issue of draining the Somerset levels. I am getting regular reports, and I look forward to seeing the report from him and other colleagues about what needs to be done.
Jenny Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've known for months now that our A&E departments and our hospitals are in trouble, but now we find that almost 30,000 ambulances have been stuck in queues outside our hospitals. Does the Prime Minister not regret not having got a grip on this issue a bit more quickly?
The point I would make to the Honourable Lady is that we have met the A&E targets more time this winter than when the Shadow Health Secretary was sitting in the Cabinet with responsibility for the NHS. I would commend what our doctors and nurses and A&E departments have done, because they are coping with around 1.2 million more A&E attendances every year than when we came to power in 2010. I think they've done magnificent work, and they're doing it on the basis of having not only many thousand more doctors, but I can tell the House we now have in the NHS 2,000 more nurses than 2010. That is more nurses in our NHS than at any time since Nye Bevan stood at this dispatch box back in the 1940s. And that's a record this government can be proud of.
Mr. Nigel Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The village of Barrow in the Ribble Valley has fewer than 300 houses. The local authority have given permission for just over 100 new houses there. But the planning inspector has overturned a refusal of the local authority and will impose 504 more houses into that village against the wishes of the local MP, the local authority and the local people. Will my right honourable friend look again at the workings of the planning inspectorate to ensure that from now on the planning inspector puts the wishes of local people at the heart of the Localism Act as he intended?
I will look very carefully at the specific incidents that the honourable member brings to the House. The point I would make is this, that under the Localism Act, local authorities are able to produce a local plan and get that agreed, which will give local people greater control over what is built and where. And in the meantime, things are judged against the National Planning Policy Framework, which does have protections for Greenbelt. It does insist on going ahead with brownfield developments, and it does take into account pre-existing local plans. And if that needs to be clarified, then clarify it we will.
Mrs. Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, the government told northern councillors to stop doffing their caps in the hopes of a handout. Then the High Court ruled that government cuts in European funding for Liverpool and Sheffield were illegal. What does all this say about the government?
Well, I think what I would say to the Honourable Lady is, of course, Liverpool, the city she represents, has huge needs in terms of funding, and I believe the funding that it gets reflects those needs. If you look at the spending per dwelling in Liverpool, for 2014, it is £2,595 per dwelling. Now, that obviously the needs of her constituency are much greater than the needs of my constituency, but that is a full £700 more per dwelling than is spent in my constituency. So I don't believe that the people of Liverpool are being shortchanged. They are properly funded for the services that they need.
Mr. Michael Thornton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year I met with Surgeon Tim Underwood, who leads the outstanding esophageal cancer team at Southampton General. Now, he explained that esophageal cancer is one of the fastest growing cancers in the West, but also one of the hardest to treat. Surgery is gruelling, incredibly painful, and many people are unaware that persistent heartburn and difficulty swallowing can be symptoms of esophageal cancer. Will he commit to raising much-needed awareness of this terrible disease and ensure that the NHS has resources to diagnose it earlier?
Well, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the issue about how we increase awareness of cancer, because that has an important effect in terms of early diagnosis. And NHS England is currently running a pilot in the North East and North Cumbria to raise awareness about esophageal and stomach cancers as part of its Be Clear on Cancer campaign. And we're committing more than £450 million of additional funding to support this early diagnosis. I think the absolute key is making sure more people have their cancer discovered from trips to the GP and from their own inspections and self-awareness, rather than finding out these things in emergency, often when it's too late.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's almost 1 million young people unemployed here in the UK. There's more than 1 million people on 0-hour contracts. Right. In my constituency, people are £1,811 worse off since 2010. How has the Prime Minister the audacity to even suggest that his party is a workers' party?
Well, let me just give him the figures for the North East since the last election. There are 24,000 more people in work in the North East since the last election. There are 40,000 more private sector jobs since the last election. Unemployment has fallen. He's shouting because he doesn't want to hear the answers about the long-term economic plan. He could talk about.
The honourable gentleman shouldn't be shouting. He's asked the question. Let him hear the answer. The Prime Minister.
He could be asking about the massive expansion at Nissan in Sunderland providing jobs in the North East. He could be talking about the new Hitachi train factory that will be built in the North East. All of this shows the plan is working, and frankly more important than these figures is the fact that every single job means another family with a pay packet, with the stability, with the security, with the peace of mind that this government's all about.
Trailers in Felixstowe, a small family-run business that is taking on apprentices. Added to the excellent EDF scheme at Sizewell and the announcement by BT, they are creating 100 new apprenticeships in Industrial Park. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that earning while you are learning is great for young people in Suffolk, and they are building the skills vital to deliver our long-term economic plan?
I would certainly agree with my honourable friend that the big companies in Britain, the BAE Systems, the BTs, the British Airways, are taking on apprentices in larger and larger numbers, and that's hugely welcome. I think the challenge for us now is to encourage the small and medium-sized enterprises of Britain to take on apprentices too. We need to make it simpler, and we've done that. We need to make sure that it pays, and we've done that. And we need to advertise to promote to these companies what a great job apprenticeships can do for them and for the country.
Pamela Nash.
Speaker, to coincide with today's launch of the new All-Party Group on youth unemployment, there's been figures published from the House of Commons Library which shows that despite, Mr Speaker, the figures the Prime Minister's just quoted, that the dole queue for under 25s still reaches from London to Edinburgh. Can the Prime Minister tell us, does he think that does that reflect a success in this policy? And will he commit to meet the new All-Party Group to discuss long-term solutions to this complex problem?
Prime Minister.
Of course there are still too many people unemployed in our country, but the fact is there are 1.6 million new private sector jobs, 1.3 million more people in work, big cuts in unemployment, big reductions in the claimant count, and also almost 500,000 fewer people reliant on out-of-work benefits. That's what we want to do, and frankly, we haven't forgotten the record of the Labour Party. Unemployment rose by nearly 500,000. 500,000. Female unemployment rose by 24%, and youth unemployment went up by 45%. Instead of giving lectures, they should be making an apology.
Bias Elwood!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recognising British success at the Oscars, would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating Bournemouth University and the Arts University, where over 50 graduates help with the design effects for that amazing British film, Gravity? And, Mr. Speaker, does it not prove that Bournemouth leads the way in digital media, is a great tourism destination, and also does amazing party conferences as well?
Well, as ever, he's right about all of those things. Bournemouth University does have excellent courses that have helped to build up the British post-production and facilities industry, which is now so busy helping to create these blockbuster films. It's very good news to see that not only are we winning Oscars for British films, but actually the British studios are full to bursting point making movies, and also the facilities industry and the post-production industry is now leading the world. We need to go on backing this industry. That's why my the Chancellor has been making steps with things like helping the gaming, the computer games industry, also helping high-end television, and continuing to back the very important film tax credits that have worked so well.
Chris. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, East Coast Ambulance Service, a private company, has gone bust, owing thousands of pounds in wages to hard-working staff. Does the Prime Minister agree that the best way to protect patients, staff and NHS resources is to extend freedom of information to private companies bidding for NHS contracts and stop the invasion of our NHS by predatory private healthcare companies?
Obviously, I'll look carefully at the individual case that he raises, but what I would say is this government is putting £12.7 billion into the NHS, and I don't believe that we should rule out saying that other organisations cannot help to deliver NHS services. If we look at the Hinchingbrook Hospital in Cambridge, it is now providing much better services because of the changes that we've made. I'll look at what he says about the freedom of information request, but I think it's important that we have a health service that can access the best of both public, private and voluntary.
Zach Goldsmith.
Speaker, it's good news that the Prime Minister has apparently resuscitated plans for a recall bill, but can he confirm that he intends to push ahead with a genuine system of recall and not fall back on the Deputy Prime Minister's bill, which has been widely discredited, which is recall in name only and which wouldn't empower voters in any meaningful sense at all?
Well, I fear it's going to be difficult to satisfy my honourable friend on this point. I think we should proceed taking the draft clauses, taking them as the starting point for what I think would be an excellent reform, a reform we committed to in our manifesto, a reform that was committed to in the coalition agreement, and that is to say that if members of Parliament are seriously in breach of standards and judged to be so, then they shouldn't have to wait for a general election to receive the verdict of their constituents.
Order.